Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for May 17th, 2022. I'm going to go through some updates on the escalation of the war against Russia on behalf of the United States and NATO, as well as an escalation that's building against China, and some more news on the economic situation, especially around the fuel costs and inflation. But let me begin with probably the most ominous news from the last couple of days, which was the decisions made by the governments of Finland and Sweden to apply for NATO membership. This is a further eastward advance of NATO to the borders of Russia. Finland has a lengthy border, 800-mile border with Russia. Sweden also touches Russia toward the Arctic Ocean. And you have now a new red line that's being crossed. Putin made clear in December of 2021 that his insistence on security guarantees included the stopping of eastward expansion of NATO, which would have included Ukraine had Ukraine joined NATO, Georgia, but also Finland and Sweden. And so we don't know for certain what the Russian reaction will be. So far, they've made some guarded statements about this being a mistake. It's also not 100% clear if it will go through the NATO board. They're trying to fast track it. But the government of Turkey has said, the Erdogan government, that it will not support this because Sweden and Finland violate NATO rules by providing arms and support for terrorist organizations operating against Turkey. But in any case, the push from the United States was clear. Blinken welcomed this decision, and it's evident that this is more of a provocation against Russia. Now, secondly, we had the overwhelming vote in the U.S. Senate to defeat an amendment by Senator Rand Paul, which would have required the establishment of an inspector general to oversee the allocation of $40 billion more aid, including mostly weapons, provided to Ukraine. Paul had insisted that there must be some oversight on this, but it was defeated 81-11. And this was in spite of a report in the Washington Post which said that the United States has little ability to keep track of where the weapons are going, including the fact that corruption in Ukraine is well known, and Ukraine has been since 2014 an arms distributor center for weapons going out throughout the world. Now, the Washington Post said there's little ability to track the arms deliveries. They quote Jeff Abramson, who's an expert on arms transfers at the Arms Control Association, who said the end-use agreements that are signed for these transfers are poorly enforced and represent a, quote, weak capacity for countries to control how weapons are used, unquote. They also quote from Rachel Stoll, who's an arms control expert and vice president of the Stimson Center. Stoll said, quote, it's just impossible to keep track of not only where they're all going and who's using them, but how they are being used, unquote. That's not very reassuring, is it? Given what we know about the weapons transferred into Syria, supposedly to moderate rebels, which ended up in the hands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorists. The problem with this is that you're just flooding weapons into networks that include well-known Nazi militia, the Azov Battalion and others. And not watching this, not overseeing this, represents the worst kind of policy from the United States. And then we have this report from NBC News Meet the Press on Sunday about new war games being conducted by the Center for New American Security, war games between U.S. and China over what would happen if China overran Taiwan. Now, first of all, CNAS, the Center for New American Security, is a military-industrial complex operation. funded by Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. The former chairman was Victoria Nuland, the overseer of the Maidan Square coup in 2014. And in reporting this, the NBC reporter asked the questions, would China attack the US mainland? And could nuclear war break out? This is obviously designed to convince Americans that we have to be concerned with China as the so-called pivot to the east is occurring. Liz Truss at the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Berlin over the weekend, Truss is the foreign minister from Britain, praised the expansion of what she called global NATO into the East and the importance of that for the US and the British. Now, meanwhile, a leading Chinese economist recommended that China scale back its holdings of US securities and US dollar-denominated assets, pointing to the seizure by the United States of over $300 billion of Russian deposits. And it said this has damaged the dollar. And he also said it's damaged the credibility of the United States as a safe place to deposit assets. This is part of what is the problem for the US with China, that the Chinese have this nasty habit of insisting on transparency when it comes to money. And the US and the British especially are more than happy to evade transparency in their financial operations, as well as, of course, just stealing money. Now, just a quick update on Nina Yankovic, as she calls herself, the new Disinformations czar overseeing the Disinformation Governance Board. There's a story out connecting her to a well-known British intelligence disinformation operation known as the Integrity Initiative, which was shut down several years ago as a result of exposure of what it really represents. But it was set up under a British government-funded operation called the Institute for Statecraft. And what this did is the Integrity Initiative created what they called clusters of well-informed people. Remember, Yankowicz calls herself a verified person. So well-informed people supposedly to track disinformation. Well, she was identified in a 2018 leak about the Integrity Initiative as being a member of the inner core of the Integrity Initiative's UK cluster. The cluster being these so-called influencers who are deployed outward to spread real disinformation and lies and propaganda. One of the other members of that inner core is Anne Applebaum, a well-known disinformation expert from the Washington Post and others. It's clear that the Disinformation Governance Panel is not just censorship, but to proliferate lies. For example, Yankovic is known for her statement that there are no Nazis in Ukraine, even when she was in Ukraine, she was getting information supposedly about Russian operations from known Nazis. So this Disinformation Governance Board should not see the light of day. Now, finally, let me just report on the growing threat to U.S. energy supply. A logistics firm called FreightWaves reported that 3 large trucking fleets are preparing for diesel pumps to run dry in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast during the summer. This has to do with the diversion of U.S. oil and diesel fuel to Europe to allow Europe to embargo, to cut off all shipments of oil and gas from Russia. What this is going to do is put enormous pressure on U.S. airlines, farmers, truckers, who will face rationing of diesel fuel. And what it also means is the prices will go up. Inflation in diesel since April 2021 is 275%. And this will hit producers, the increased costs, then consumers. Farmers are facing huge increased costs in fuel and also fertilizer, which is directly related to this problem. So what we're seeing is policies which will increase the overall rate of inflation that are moving really quickly at a point at which the country is already facing a series of disruptions from supply chains and so on. Now, to address this, the Schiller Institute is beginning to prepare a follow-up conference to our highly successful and important April 9th conference. Tentatively, we've chosen June 25th for this, to bring together people to discuss the convening of a conference to create a new security and financial architecture. Keep an eye on the Schiller Institute website for more details on this and help us organize to make this a successful event. Now, finally, from yesterday, we did not put the website of Diane Sayre in the description box, but I think it's important that people can go to her website to read her statement on the shootings in Buffalo and the relationship of that to the Ukraine war. For that, you go to SARE for Senate, SARE for Senate. And with that, I'll sign off and see you again tomorrow.